Welcome to Module 1, The Human Machine. My name is Shauna Rodabaugh. I'll be your instructor this term. And before we learn a whole lot about anatomy, we need to learn the terminology that is used for anatomy. And this is going to be what we are going to be building on throughout the entire semester. So it's important to know the correct terminology and how the body is positioned as far as, whether or not we're referring to our left or the decedent's left, etc. So let's go through and start to look at this terminology and look at the various sections of anatomy. Life has certain divisions. The very smallest form of life is going to be an atom. A combination of atoms turns into molecules, and a combination of molecules makes a cell. So cells are where you start to see the first qualities of life. Cells are able to respond to stimulus, so if you push it, it can push back. They have the ability to take in food and water, ability to produce waste, grow and mature, and ability to reproduce. These are all considered to be signs of life. A cell, the anatomy of a cell, is somewhat complicated, but we're not going to get too terribly in depth with it. The nucleus is going to be this, let's get my little thingy here. The nucleus is going to be this little center part right here. Okay. And what that does is it controls the activities of the cell and contains the genetic material for that cell. So the genetic material is what is used to reproduce. The cytoplasm, which is this little part right here, all of this pink stuff here. That cytoplasm is all of the stuff between the nucleus and the cell wall. It contains ribosomes. Okay, so right here we have these little ribosomes. Hello. Those ribosomes will synthesize proteins in the system. You've got mitochondria, which produce energy, and our little mitochondria are right here. So those produce energy for the cell. You have lysosomes, which actually start to digest things within the cell. It's going to be this little dude right here. And you have endoplasmic reticulum. Endoplasmic reticulum is going to transport nutrients. That's this little dude right here. And then centrioles, which control reproduction and cell division. So there's your little centrioles right here. Okay. Tissues. A collection of cells is going to be called a tissue. And tissues are going to be arranged, similar cells are going to be arranged to provide specific functions for specific types of tissues. So we have various different types of tissues. First of all, we have epithelial tissue, which is the outer layer covering the surface of many body parts. It also lines the surface of many cavities and many organs, and we'll get to those distinctions here in a minute. They also form membranes, which are thin little sheet-like expanses of epithelial tissue. Then you have connective tissue. Connective tissue consists of loose areolar connective, which binds other body tissues. Okay. Adipose tissues is it stores fat. So when you feel the fat cells in your stomach or in your legs, if you have any, obviously. If you feel those fat cells, that is called adipose tissue. You've got fibrous connective tissue, which offers strength and support. An example would be like a tendon or a ligament. You have bone, cartilage, and then hematopoietic, which is blood. Okay. You also have muscle tissue. There are two different types of muscle tissue. There's smooth muscle tissue. A lot of organs are going to be composed of smooth muscle tissue. And then you have cardiac muscle tissue. The cardiac muscle tissue is going to be the tissue in your heart. Got nervous tissues. Groups of tissue are going to be organs, and organs group together to form specific functions. So we've got layers here. We start off with atoms, then we go to molecules, then we go to cells, then we go to tissues, and now we're going to go to organs. There are several organ systems, and we're going to go through every one of these systems in this course. There's the skeletal system comprised of bone, the circulatory system, which circulates blood throughout the entire body, muscular system, which controls movement, endocrine system, which controls hormones, nervous system, which controls the various sensations in the body, digestive, which controls nutrients, urinary, which excretes waste, respiratory, brings in air into the system, reproductive, and integumentary, which is skin. So when we talk about anatomy, there are actually various different types of anatomy. And what we're going to be studying is going to be general anatomy, systemic anatomy. But the other types of anatomy, gross anatomy is just the gross structures. We're looking at nothing more than, this is the cervical spine. This is where it's located. We're not looking at function. We're not looking at anything else. Gross anatomy covers just those gross organs and where they're located. Histology is going to be the study of microscopic structures. So if I'm looking at skin cells and I can see the various layers, I can see the epithelial skin cells, those at the cellular layer is what histology is going to cover. Regional anatomy is going to be anatomy that is studied by region. So instead of saying, I'm going to study the circulatory system, I'm going to say, I'm going to study the neck, and I'm going to look at the relationships of the circulatory system to the muscular system to everything else. I'm looking at everything by region instead of by system. Then systemic anatomy is going to be the study of anatomy by system. So you'll look at the entire body and you'll look at, okay, I'm looking at the circulatory system through the entire body as opposed to just in one part of the body. Topographical anatomy is going to be the study of surface anatomy, and this is going to become very important when you are embalming because you're going to use a lot of surface markers on the skin to figure out where your incisions need to be, to figure out where certain arteries are, and where you're supposed to be going with all of that. Developmental anatomy is the study of how different parts of the anatomy come to be. It's also called embryology, where you start off with an embryo and you start to see how the various organs develop, and you can see parts of the organs which are left over from their embryological development. Medical legal anatomy is investigative anatomy, so medical legal would be for autopsies, that type of thing. Comparative anatomy is the study of structures between species. So comparative anatomy would say, okay, I'm looking at a human and I'm looking at an ape, and I can see various different types of similarities, but I can also see various different types of differences and compare the two. And then you've got radiology, which is the study of medical imaging. All right, so now that we know about the various different types of anatomy and we know how the smaller structures turn into the larger structures, we're going to start talking about standard anatomical terminology. Standard anatomical terminology is used across the board, whether you're speaking with a physician, whether you're speaking with another funeral director, another embalmer. These are generally accepted terms to describe where something is on the human body. Before we get into the actual structures themselves, we need to understand what is called the standard anatomical position. Okay, and everything that we're going to be describing is going to be described from this standard anatomical position. Okay, so the position is standing erect, upright like this, arms at the sides, face, toes, and palms facing forward. So you see the palms facing forward here, toes facing forward, face facing forward, and feet flat on the floor. The reason being is if you change this, if you change the way that the positioning is, you'll change the direction that something is going, which will make a little more sense when we start to talk about this anatomical terminology. But just know that the standard anatomical position, standing erect, arms at the sides, face, toes, and palms facing forward, and feet flat on the floor. This is a perfect example right here of the standard anatomical position. Anytime you are discussing a direction, you're going to be discussing it from this position. So let's talk about directional terms, okay? When we say left or right, you're referring to the body, not the embalmer. So if I am facing this individual laying on the floor, my left is going to be their right. Their right is going to be my left. You always default to the individual that you're describing. So if I say right, it is the decedent's right. If I say left, it is the decedent's left. Okay? Superior and inferior mean up and down. So if I'm talking about superior, I'm talking about toward the head. Okay? And if I'm talking about inferior, I'm talking about toward the toes. For an example, the belly button is inferior to the head, okay? Or the head is superior to the belly button. Make sense? Deep and superficial is, deep means toward the core of the body, the center of the body. So I'm actually going to go down into the body, meaning deep. Superficial meaning toward the surface of the body. So skin would be superficial, whereas the intestine would be deep. Okay. Lateral and medial. There is a central line across the body in the anatomical position. It is called the mid-sagittal line. Okay. From this mid-sagittal line, lateral means away from that. Medial means toward that central line. Okay. So if I were talking about the arm, okay, this arm is, okay, let's think about this again. Let's say I have a wound right here. Okay, I'm going to be discussing it's on the left lateral side. Okay, if I have a wound right here, it is on the left medial side. Anterior and posterior. Anterior means the front of the body. Posterior means the back of the body. Proximal and distal means attachment to the body versus something that's further from the body. So anything that attaches close to the body is going to be proximal to the body. Once you move away from that attachment, such as an arm, you're talking about distal. Okay. And then prone means that you are face up in the anatomical position, laying on the ground. Supine means you're face down, laying on the ground. All right, the body is divided into planes, and these planes help us determine, some of these directional terms that we're going to be using. Bilateral symmetry. So the human has the same structures on the left and right that are similar. So you've got a left eye, you've got a right eye, you've got a left arm, you've got a right arm, etc. And you've got body planes that actually are going to separate the front and the back, the left and the right, and the top and the bottom. So looking at these planes right here, we have what's called a horizontal or transverse plane. That separates the body into top and bottom. You have a coronal plane that goes straight through and separates the body from front to back. Then you have the sagittal plane that comes through the side that separates it into left and right. Okay, let's go back a little bit. Well, let's not go back. It won't let me go back. So within all of these planes and these directional terms, we're also going to have body cavities, okay? And these cavities are going to be separating where various organs are located. So you can use generalized terms to talk about where various organs are going to be. The dorsal cavity is going to contain the brain and the spinal cord, okay? Ventral is going to be containing the thoracic cavity, which also contains the right and left pleural cavities, the mediastinum, which contains the pericardial cavity. You have the abdominopelvic cavity, which contains the abdominal, the peritoneal, and the pelvic cavities. Okay, so what does all this mean? First of all, you've got your dorsal cavity, okay? Your dorsal cavity is going to be this entire body cavity right here. It's going to contain a couple of smaller cavities, which are your cranial cavity and your spinal cord. Okay, then you'll have a larger ventral body cavity, which is this entire area right here. Okay, that entire area is going to contain your thoracic cavity, which is right here. Okay, that thoracic cavity contains the right and the left pleural cavities, which are right here. It contains the mediastinum right here, and the mediastinum contains the pericardial cavity right here. Okay, then you're going to have within still the ventral cavity the abdominopelvic cavity, which is this entire area right here. That area contains the abdominal cavity, which is right here, and the pelvic cavity, which is right here. So you start off with two main cavities, dorsal and ventral, that are broken down into all of these smaller cavities. There are also quadrants and regions, and these quadrants and regions become important when we start to talk about when we're embalming and we're doing cavity treatments. We are going to be draining body fluids from certain areas and certain quadrants and regions. So quadrants are going to be larger areas, less specific. Regions are going to be smaller areas, more specific. So here's your quadrants. The abdominal pelvic cavity is sectioned into the right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, and left lower quadrant. Now, if you're getting into regions, which will more specifically tell you where some of the organs are, you've got the right hypochondriac region, the epigastric region, the left hypochondriac region, right lumbar, umbilical, left lumbar, right iliac, hypogastric region, and left iliac region. Okay. Now, there are a ton of terms on this page right now. Part of your assignment this week is going to go through and become familiar with all of this terminology. You're going to know what the term abdominal means: antecubital, axillary, brachial, buccal or oral, calf, carpal, cephalic. I want you to go through with, in the back of your book, there are plenty of various different, now let's see if I can find the right one. There are lots of, oh, there we go. There's lots of photographs and things in the back of your book that you can use to start identifying these various regions of the body. So your case study this week is to go through and identify each one of these regions in the body. And there will be a template for that on the website. So you'll be able to fill in that template for your case study. Okay. So as a review, all right, start thinking about what cavity or cavities are represented by this circle. Okay. What is the triangle? Where is the triangle? Right here. In relation to, look at that. Where's the triangle in relation to the triangle? Listen to me. Where's the triangle in relation to the circle? Okay. If I'm talking about the square, what region is that in? What quadrant and region are represented by the triangle? And what position is the cadaver in? So start to think about those things. All of those things are going to come together as part of your assignment this week. Please go to Blackboard, look under the assignment portion of this week's module, and you will see your assignments there.